So one of the other massive canards here is that Israel is restricting humanitarian assistance into the Gaza Strip. I mean, you just need to look at the stats.
They are restricting humanity. They are.
Put out by Kogat.
Use of starvation as a method of warfare. Importantly, it doesn't require any type of special intent the way genocide does. All it requires is that starvation would follow in the ordinary course of events from the blockade, basically. Actually, good pushback here.
Leaving that area or going to that area. Israel has military control of both those areas.
True, they have checkpoints, they have military controls, they have bypass roads that only Israelis are allowed to use. There are multiple cases we can look at of Israeli soldiers fucking killing unarmed Palestinians for no reason. I guess I never thought about that. Israel or Egypt probably actually does have an obligation under international law to accept refugees. I understand why they don't.
Mark my words, there will never be a separate peace between Israel and the Arab world without a solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Well, he looks a little bit silly now, and so do all of
No, he doesn't look silly. What do you mean he was fucking proven right, dude? Yeah, this whole like capsule theory thing that Israel can just keep putting off the Palestinian issue forever and ever and ever and try to make peace with all the Arab states. Well, how do you think that makes the Palestinians feel, dude? How do you think it makes the Palestinians feel when they're seeing like every Arab state abandon them? Do you not think they're just gonna fucking rise up against Israel at that point? Like, there is no genocide, no apartheid, no occupation. She got that topologist Dave. Can't trust it. True. No genocide, agree. No apartheid, agreed for the most part. No occupation. There is an argument to be made that there's no illegal occupation. No occupation period seems a little weird.
Natasha, welcome to Triggernometry. We've got a lot to talk about. You've been one of the people giving legal context on many of the discussions around Israel and Palestine over the last...
Hold on, let me just move my webcam down. Oops, that's not the right button. Okay, corner.
Last
Great.
Many months. And what we really wanted to do with you is just to kind of ask you the normal person's question about, because, you know, most people are just like, they look at their phone or they turn on the TV for 20 minutes at the end of the day and they, you know, genocide, apartheid, like all of these linguistic terms, and no one really knows what they mean. And some people are using it and some people are saying that's not what's happening. So first and foremost, can you talk to us about the genocide conversation that's being had and what your perspective as a lawyer is on all of that?
I think the first thing to understand is the context for the use of both genocide, apartheid, and many other terms that have a legal origin, but no legal basis in terms of their application to Israel. I'd say no legal or factual basis, and the reasons that these terms are being deployed. I've talked about this in other contexts as the modern blood libel. So if you think about scholars who've talked about the evolution of anti-Semitism, something that started in the Middle Ages with a focus on the Jews as a religion, evolved, and when science took over from religion as the order of the day, the hatred of the Jews, anti-Semitism, manifested itself in a hatred of the Jewish race. And that was a time when the pseudoscience of eugenics was used in order to justify that hatred. But today, we've moved away from that in the context of international law and human rights being the order of the day. The late, great former Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom, Lord Jonathan Sacks, talked about how anti-Semitism today manifests itself in a hatred of the Jewish state in that context of...
I don't tell you, it's just so... I don't like 100% disagree for like, it's just so cringe. Like every time you're like, well, can you describe what a genocide means in legal context? Anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism, it's anti-Semitism.
International law and human rights. And what we see with the terms that you've raised is modern blood libels being deployed. So while in the 18th or even before that, you know, in the Middle Ages, Jews were accused of killing Christian children to use their blood for religious rituals. Today, we have these notions of Israel targeting children, which is abhorrently false. We have these notions of genocide being propagated, another blood libel. We can come on to apartheid perhaps in due course. But
let's stick with genocide, though, because I hear what you're talking about and I understand why you link it to blood libel and anti-Semitism. But what I'm trying to get at is, if I'm an average Gen Z with TikTok and I open my TikTok and I see kids being blown up in Gaza, and then I hear someone saying genocide, and then I see these pictures every day on my TikTok for 8 months, you merge those two things together in someone's head who doesn't know much about what's going on, and a fairly reasonable, uneducated, uninformed, but fairly reasonable person might then be like, well, I don't know what genocide means exactly, but it seems like killing lots of people who, by definition, would be innocent if they're kids. So you say that's not what's happening. Can you just explain more of that?
In terms of, I'll come back on to
double standard in how people try to apply IHL and occupation law in Israel, but it does have, to Israel that does have at least some link to anti-Semitism, but this is insane. Yeah.
Legal definition of the term, because I completely accept
I'd
what you
probably
say,
agree with
which is
that.
that the images that so many people are basing these false conclusions on are horrific, and they need to be understood in their proper context. So this is footage coming out of Gaza, which is controlled by Hamas, and is serving a very clear propaganda aim of an internationally prescribed terrorist organization that is abusing its own people and using civilians as human shields. and celebrating any civilian casualties in Gaza. So quite apart from
Okay, she's mostly right. It's okay. You can say the videos coming out of Gaza play into Hamas's narrative, play into Hamas's goal, right? That's fine. But they're not controlled by Hamas. There are videos from Hamas, like Hamas does make videos with the fucking red triangle shit, but most of the videos coming from Gaza are not controlled by Hamas.
the fact that we will not know the story behind the images that you're referring to, simply because Hamas controls Gaza absolutely, and no information that is not approved by Hamas is making it out into the international discourse at the moment. Quite apart from that, the attribution.
Does she think people in Gaza have cell phones? She knows that, right? They have cell phones. They have fucking Snapchat. You can go on Snap Maps and see all the videos that people post on Snapchat from Gaza. Like, people, they have cell phones.
Is to Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist organizations, because this is their aim. They have, at the moment, only one objective, and that is survival. And the way that they ensure, in their minds, their survival and their ability to continue to threaten Israeli civilians and carry out this specific threat of conducting the 7th of October over and over again, the way that they seek to ensure being able to do that is by driving up international pressure against Israel with these propaganda images and messages. And the use of the term genocide is unbelievably pernicious. This was a term that was coined, in fact, to give terminology to the Jewish experience in the Holocaust, to provide a legal lexicon to describe the targeting of Jews as Jews by the Nazis. The definition of genocide is specific to include the intention to eradicate a group, an ethnic, religious, or racial group, in whole or in part. And it's that intention to eradicate part or whole of a group, which is certainly what Israel, certainly what the Jews experienced in the Holocaust, certainly what the acts of genocide on the 7th of October were aimed at. Hamas and other terrorists across the border were clear about their intention, and intention is central to the whole concept of the international crime of genocide. That this is now being used as an allegation against Israel is...
Yeah, she should have, this is what she should have started with. She should have started with the, well, like, the videos of the, you know, the killing don't tell you anything about the, intent. Like, you have to take into account the intent. That's what's important for the genocide stuff.
Inverting reality.
Is it though, Natasha, sorry to interrupt, but when Piers Morgan was sitting in that very chair only a couple of weeks ago, he said, look, I don't think what Israel is doing is genocide, but there are people in the Israeli government who are using genocidal rhetoric about cleansing Gaza of the Palestinians, etc. Would you not accept that maybe one of the reasons people are sometimes persuaded to that point of view is some of the things that Israeli officials are saying?
Please. She should probably just bite this bullet. She should probably bite this bullet.
We need to be clear about the quotes that people have deployed to advance that argument. The vast majority have been utterly misrepresented, in particular, those that have been made by any members of the War Cabinet or anyone with an input to policy, including military officials. One of the prime examples of this was the way that South Africa's application to the International Court of Justice, which made this obscene allegation of genocide, was misrepresenting these quotations. For example, suggesting that
Okay, she's right. There are plenty of quotes that have been misrepresented, but I feel like you gotta bite the bullet that, like, at least some of these quotes are, if not genocidal, like pretty bad. They're not misrepresented. There are fucking evil people in, oh, she has lawyer brain, that's true, in the Likud party.
These Israeli officials were talking about all Palestinians, when it's very clear from the original Hebrew, from the context of which these quotes were taken from, that they are talking about Hamas. And it is entirely legitimate to talk about eradicating Hamas because of the threat that they pose, not just to Israel, of course, but the threat that they also pose to our Western liberal democratic values. I think we have to fundamentally understand that Israel is not just fighting its own war against Islamist extremist groups, but is also fighting on behalf of the West in many respects. But when you take into account the way that both the images, the quotations, and the facts on the ground have been so badly misrepresented, I mean, all of this ultimately feeds into what we have seen in terms of this blood libel taking hold. And I agree with you, Constantine, it is extremely effective. And it is based not just on what we've seen over the last 8 months, 9 months now, but on decades of anti-Israel propaganda. Already in 1975, we had the United Nations passing that infamous Zionism is racism resolution. We have had deeply ingrained anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist propaganda.
I wish she would refute that argument. There's an argument to be made there that, like, oh, well, Zionism requires a Jewish majority state. That's going to require that, like, there are that Jewish people be granted special privileges in that society. Now, people confuse what special privileges mean, right? Because really, the good is we're talking about the right of return. Really, all that it strictly requires is the right of return for Jewish people for the immigration stuff. But I can't find my fucking. I really like the way Sam Harris phrases stuff in one of his blog posts, but I can't find it. It's been forever.
propaganda pervasive throughout the Middle East, throughout the Soviet Union, of course, in the past, and now increasingly on our television screens on a daily basis because of the tragedy that is unfolding in the Gaza Strip, a tragedy that I have to insist on reiterate.
He did a really good job with one of his blog posts talking about it, and I wish she would use something more like his language. But I can't find it. I don't know where it is.
Is ultimately, fully, wholly, entirely the responsibility of Hamas and their apologists around the world. And if we unpack that for just one moment, we need to come to terms with the international community's responsibility for what we have seen on the 7th of October and subsequent. Because 3,000 terrorists don't just wake up one morning and decide that it's a good day to slaughter Jews. It takes something extra special.
Here's the blog post, but I don't know where my notes in it. I have like quotes from it and notes in it somewhere. I really like one of the quotes here. Oh, maybe it isn't from this. Yeah, there's one quote that's like, you lose so much if you count the dead bodies. I really like the, there are now. There are now two types of people in this world. Those who intentionally torture and kill children and other non-combatants to maximize horror, and those who seek to avoid doing so, however imperfectly, while defending themselves against the first order people. The gulf between these two groups could not be wider, and everything we care about, literally everything, exists on one side of it.
Thousands of people to commit the sort of atrocities that we saw on the 7th of October. And I know that you've had previous apologists for Hamas on with you who've denied rape that occurred, who've denied what was not only celebrated by Hamas and documented by them, but also transmitted around the world, sometimes live streamed from the very victims' phones who were suffering these unspeakable atrocities. But what is it, I think we have to ask ourselves, that causes people to be capable of such medieval barbarism? This doesn't happen overnight. It is as a result of generations of brainwashing, and I say that the international community is complicit in it because we have been funding UNRWA, and 3/4 of those terrorists, according to UNRWA statistics, UN statistics...
Can I just stop you there, because there'll be people listening who go, I don't know what UNRWA is, what is this? So if you could just explain that for the layman, and by layman I mean me.
The UN Relief and Works Agency is a special body that was set up. In fact, if you read the book...
it's a front for Hamas.
Wilson Ali Schwartz wrote called The War of Return. It is a seminal piece of work that documents how and why UNRWA was established and with what motivation and what the aims were. Essentially, it was established to perpetuate this phenomenon of refugee status amongst Palestinians uniquely, that it is passed down generation to generation. So there's a general UN body that looks after refugees all around the world. And then separately, there is UNRWA, and they run schools that teach the Palestinian Authority-approved curriculum. From kindergarten up, these children have been indoctrinated to believe that the highest calling in life is to become a martyr and to kill as many Jews as...
Fake economy, in my opinion. Just think about the PKK or UNRWA in the US, NATO, etc. Tactical alignment with them. Wait, what's the false dichotomy? Are you talking about what she's making, or the Sam Harris quote?
As possible.
Are you saying they teach this in their schools?
I do, and that is well documented by NGOs impacting sea.
I don't think it's a false dichotomy. The US and NATO have, for the most part, I mean, there are, of course, like there probably are specific instances that we can look at where the US did seek to maximize horror or whatever. We certainly, especially during World War II, there was a certain level of morale bombing that went on, but yeah.
He has done many, many studies of textbooks. It's been recognized by governments around the world. Now, some of these textbooks existed elsewhere in the Arab world. Saudi Arabia has done a phenomenal amount of work to de-radicalize and to address and entirely reform the content in its textbooks. But you will have Palestinian Authority-approved curricula taught in UN-run schools that teaches mathematics according to how many Jews are killed, plus a few more, or teaches physics according to how a slingshot
Can we get a source?
might be used to fire rockets.
We do get a source. Hell yeah. During the first Palestinian uprising, Palestinians used slingshots to confront the soldiers of the Zionist occupation and defend themselves from their treacherous bullets. What is the relationship between the elongation of slingshot? Slingshot's rubber and tensile strength affecting it. What are the forces that influence the stone after it's released from the slingshot?
I mean, that is pervasive. Not only that, they celebrate the so-called martyrs. They name football teams after them, schools even.
Mass page for a 9 and 10-year-old asks the number of martyrs of the first Intifada is 2,026 martyrs. The number of martyrs in the Al-Aqsa Intifada is 5,050.
So
number, yeah, awesome.
If you're familiar with what has been happening over many decades now, then the atrocities of the 7th of October and what happened, albeit shocking that 3,000 terrorists managed to break Israeli defenses and cross the borders, the repercussions of that, what followed, has been in no way surprising, because those of us that were alive to these issues had our eyes open, not just to the textbooks and what is taught in schools, or on television, children's programs, or the nursery rhymes and songs, or what has been found now in the context of these operations in Gaza in homes, quite apart from the many, many copies of Mein Kampf, board games that talk.
Are any of those real? The Mein Kampf stuff. I'm pretty sure I saw them being fucking community noted on Twitter. Mein Kampf book Gaza. I don't know if I believe any of these. There are complex networks and actors that sometimes place those people who have children and soldiers and target them in horrible ways, aligned with, e.g., the U.S. against their people, like Assad, do some on a larger scale. Wait, you're saying? Okay, sorry. There are complex networks and actors, true, that sometimes place those people who have child soldiers and target civilians in horrible ways, aligned with. I don't think I'm reading this correctly.
Talk about attacking Israelis. You know, children's books, nursery rhymes. It is a whole culture that has been developed.
Oh, I've seen this before too. Saying there are not actively chosen people in the world that can be divided into two camps, as Harris describes. I mean, it's obviously quote unquote reductionist, because you mentioned the complex networks of people. But the point is, as a matter of policy, I would say those two types exist for the most part. As a matter of official policy, those are the two types of people that exist in the world. Dude, the fucking dramatic music in the background of this is so funny. Okay, we don't need to watch all these. I don't like, they're bad. Yep. Oh, the bee. The Jew killing bee. I've seen this one before.
لما يجي اليهود عنده يمسكوه
طبعا الجيران اليهوديين عندي يطب الشرطي
بس الحرامي.
No offense, but the Trump train is approaching its final stops. If you don't get on now, it may be your chance to miss the destination. That just seems like a threat on your part, buddy. It would take a lot for me to get on the Trump train. I like most of Biden's policies, and I think Trump is a fucking traitor to the Constitution that tried to overturn an election. You'd have to do a lot of convincing for me to actually get on the Trump train. But
والبيعمل مشاكل.
وبتطخي اليهود صح؟ فيك تصيري زيه؟ إن شاء الله لما تكبري.
wait, doesn't he brainwash me?
كلهم طيب.
It is a whole culture that
Oh
has been
wow,
developed,
Cock
to
McStuffin
underpin what happened on
69.
the 7th of October. And the only reason that hasn't happened prior is because of the very stringent security measures that Israel has taken. And there are many, many who criticize a lax approach, an over degree of confidence, even a naivety by the government of Israel to believe that Hamas might have put aside its genocidal aims because they didn't participate in barrages of rockets in 2021 that were in fact fired by a separate Palestinian terrorist organization. Palestinians
Donald Trump is a hero of Earth.
They were fired from Gaza into Israel, onto Israeli civilian communities.
You realize whenever you say that, or people say stuff like that, it just makes it sound like you're in a cult. I like Joe Biden. I really like Biden. I think Biden is a really good president. Way better than I first expected him to be. Yeah, I prefer Biden over like the other Democrats. Like I probably would have voted for Biden in the primaries or Pete Buttigieg, probably. But I would never make statements like Biden's a hero of this earth.
That was the last major exchange between Gaza and Israel. Hamas didn't engage, and there were many in Israel that thought, oh, well, maybe they've ordered their priorities differently. Maybe now they are finally looking at state building. They're finally looking at the interests of their people. Well, in the context of what has followed, that was devastatingly naive, because Hamas, from the very inception of their charter, have had their genocidal aims on full display for the world to see. These are not in any way hidden. On the contrary, these are celebrated. And in that context, when you understand the educational aspects, the indoctrination, and also separately, and this is the other major factor to take into account, the incentivization to terror, then I think everything starts to make an awful lot more sense. And what I
Incentivization
mean
to
when
terror. Donald Trump is a great white hope, but it's the old Great Depression. I pray to destiny he's the chosen one in the fight against demons has started. Trump. True. Base, big UNRWA moment there. Okay, well, we'll do the Trump stuff in a bit. We're watching this Israel-Palestine thing right now. If you want to talk about Trump versus Biden and Israel-Palestine, you can do that, but maybe just talk about Trump in general. I'm not going to reply, because otherwise the VOD gets ruined when I upload it to YouTube, because it's just me talking to chat.
say incentivization is the terror salaries that are paid by the so-called moderates in this equation, the Palestinian Authority. So this is the autonomy that governs the West Bank, because it's important to understand that the Palestinians have autonomy. We can come on to the separate blood
Okay, I think, well,
libel of occupation and why that is entirely false. But as
she's going to mention the martyr fund,
a
isn't
matter of
she?
fact, the Palestinians have autonomy in the West Bank since the Oslo Accords in the 90s.
Palestinians have autonomy in Area A, and it's not even really the Palestinians, it's fucking Abbas, who has a negative approval rating, because they haven't had elections since 2006. Now, a reason that they wouldn't have elections is because Hamas would fucking win those elections, but yeah, it's not even really the Palestinians. Israel's been building settlements the entire fucking time. They still occupy Area C. They still control some of the water. Oh shit, I don't remember at this point. Oh god damn it. The fucking, I'm pretty sure Israel has control over a lot of the water there, but you'd have to fact check me.
And they have self-governance in the Gaza Strip since Israel's withdrawal in 2005. But the Palestinian Authority, that so many people now are touting as the potential future rulers of Gaza, that are presented as the moderates in this equation, they pay the salaries of terrorists, no matter what banner they coalesce under, including the Hamas terrorists, the Nukhba force individuals who planned and executed the 7th of October. They pay the salaries of these terrorists dependent on how many Jews they have slaughtered, dependent on
I haven't heard that they pay Hamas specifically. P-A, how do you spell martyr? I have no clue how to spell martyr.
the severity of the 7th of October.
Okay, wait, I'm just going to look up P-A font. Oh my god. Oh, thanks, chat. I haven't heard that they PA Martyr Fund to Hamas. I haven't heard that they pay to Hamas people. Hamas payments. This is in 2007. They fought their fucking civil war. I don't know why. I don't know why they would pay for them. U.S. is oh wait, I didn't even know this. The U.S. is nearing a deal to Palestinian Authority to end its contentious martyr payments. Oh, thanks, Tiger Girl, for the follow. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming in. For people who commit acts of violence against Israel, two Biden administration said, "Oh, goddamn, that'd be a key win for the multifaceted U.S. push to reform the PA, from instituting anti-corruption measures to improving basic services, so that it can take over governance at the Gaza Strip whenever the Israel-Hamas war ends." It actually is edge case to consider someone who is First Nation / Indigenous. Oh wait, you guys are responding to each other. Never mind. PA oversees parts of the West Bank. Martyr Payments Program financially supports Palestinians and their families if they are wounded, imprisoned, or killed while carrying out acts of violence against Israel. I don't know. I just haven't heard that it pays to Hamas. According to a 2001 report by the Israeli government, the prisoners' families received the initial lump sum payment between $500 and $5,000, mostly stipends about $100. Does PA Martyr Fund? First time here, how's it going? It's going pretty good right now. she could be right. I just can't find a source for it. And it just seems odd to me that they would do that when Hamas and the PA don't really like each other. And they've literally fought their fucking civil war in 2007 for control of the Gaza Strip. And they don't typically really get along. But, you know, maybe she's right. Maybe. Oh, there's something. Oh, this is a Destiny talking point. Localist Party. This is a Destiny talking point. It is important to mention that there was no third intifada in I love Destiny in the West Bank after Al-Aqsa flood, after the October 7th attacks and Israel's response to it. The Houthis did shit. Lebanon did shit. Hamas is still fighting. There was no third intifada in the West Bank. There was an increase in violence. There was an increase in the number of Palestinian children slaughtered by Israel. 50 children died, and there's no war in the West Bank. Yeah, it's like that kind of is important. Now, arguably, that actually makes the boss unpopular because he's seen as a collaborator with Israel from the people in Palestine. But I think under different leadership, there probably could have been a third intifada, and that would have been really bad.
They pay the salaries of these terrorists.
Also, that deal that we're reading about will be interesting to see once it happens. To reform the PA.
Dependent on how many Jews they have slaughtered, dependent on the severity of their sentence. And the
I think
organisers
there's more
of the
conspiracy
7th of
theory that
October,
Hamas PA
some
are
of whom
all
were
one
released in the
organization
2011 Gilad
that
Shalit
people on
Ali
Israel
Kadi
or
included,
people on the
by
Israeli
all
far right
accounts,
like to push.
planned
Yeah,
for 2 years what was executed on the 7th of October while he was collecting a monthly stipend. He didn't have to work. He was looked after by the Palestinian Authority and went through the meticulous.
Wait,
Ali
who is
Kadi
this?
included.
Ali Kadi. If I had to guess, this person probably started receiving payments from like earlier on, like during the second Intifada, not for what he did with Hamas. This is a musical artist. Hamas commander Ali Kadi. He was involved in planning the... Okay. He was from the West Bank. In 2005, he was arrested for his... Yeah. I bet he got the martyrdom payment for this prior to the Hamas-Palestinian PA civil war. And then they just kept paying it to him. They didn't pay it to him because of what he did for Hamas. They paid it to him prior to the Hamas PA civil war in 2007.
By all accounts, planned for 2 years what was executed on the 7th of October while he was collecting a monthly stipend. He didn't have to work. He was looked after by the Palestinian Authority and went through the meticulous planning process. So when you start to understand the indoctrination and the incentivization to terror, the two eyes, if you will, let's call them the two eyes, which are critical to everything that we have seen over the last 9 months, critical to understanding the situation on the ground, but also where it is that people are having the wool pulled over their eyes when they look at these horrific images coming out of Gaza and they don't understand the context. Another aspect of that context when we talk about the images is Hamas. I mentioned that they use civilians as human shields. They use, of course, mosques, schools, hospitals, and by all accounts, every second house in the Gaza Strip as part of their terror infrastructure. So when you hear people talking about the widespread destruction in Gaza, there is a reason for that, and that is because all of Gaza over 16 years had been turned into a terror base for Hamas. The thousands, if not hundreds of...
Again, she's not wrong. There are more diplomatic ways to phrase these points. I never use the word human shield. I always use the word passive precautions. Hamas is failing in passive precautions that they were required to take under Article 58 of the Geneva Convention. Article 58, additional Protocol 1, 57. Oh, goddamn it. I use shield. Fuck. It is 57. Okay, I was one off. Goddamn. I think it's 57. Yeah. Well, I'll wait. No, it is 58. Fuck you. 58, Section B. Avoid locating military objects within or near densely populated areas. I think there's actually more to them that are probably in 57. I don't know exactly where it is. I don't know. I always just use passive precautions. A big thing is that Hamas was in control of the Gaza Strip for 16 years, and during that time, it was entirely feasible to them, as the ruling authority in Gaza, to section off parts of the Gaza Strip for military purposes, but they never did that. They instead spent millions of dollars building tunnels.
Kilometers of terror tunnels that they have built, which of course they do not use to protect civilians. They put their forces in the terror tunnels and their civilians on top of them to protect their terror infrastructure.
Oh, no, you're all right. Okay. Wait, no, this is due to Warren. Fuck, where is passive? Article 58 of Additional Protocol 1. And it's accepted to be customary international law. Defenders have to take passive precautions.
But when you consider how widespread
Should never doubt
the Hamas,
myself.
terror infrastructure is in the Gaza Strip, you start to see those photographs in a bit of a different context. But why is it important then?
Also, importantly, the use of human shield doesn't preclude any Israeli failing or any Israeli crime, okay? Just because you're a human shield doesn't mean you're not a civilian. Human shields are still granted every protection that civilians are granted. Unless you're a voluntary human shield, I think it's more complicated. But involuntary human shields, which are what she's claiming the people of Gaza are still granted. Oh, this is the rule. Yeah, this is the customary international law rules. Yeah, Rule 11. Or wait, Article 11? What is this? This isn't the rules. This is... Oh wait, Article 49 of the 14th Geneva Convention. Oh, this is also passive precautions. What is this? I draft for the limitation the dangers of the civilian population. I'm not aware of what this treaty is, but it does discuss passive precautions. But so does this treaty as well, the 14 Geneva Conventions. Anyway, point is, Hamas is failing in it. Obviously and clearly. I don't either. Seriously, yeah. I don't think the terminology passive precautions was used in the writing itself. That's just what lawyers call them.
That Israel waited for so long after the 7th of October before going into Gaza. Why is it important?
So the steelman here, I don't think Casey's here right now. I think Casey's probably streaming. That Casey pointed out to me. He was right on this. They did wait a long time before they invaded. Now, part of that was pressure from the Biden administration. They probably wouldn't have went in earlier if Biden didn't pressure them to delay their invasion. Part of that was also rain. I'm pretty sure there was heavy rain that caused them to delay. But they did delay their invasion. They did do that. That was a good thing. However, they did do airstrikes only 24 hours after the October 7th attack. Which it's not necessarily bad, because Israel also has multiple warning things to warn people before doing airstrikes. Like, they have their phone bank where they call people and tell them to evacuate buildings that are about to be airstriked. Like, they do their best to do that. But yeah,
important that it has taken this war in stages, that it has moved so slowly and meticulously, because it has afforded the opportunity for as many civilians as possible to evacuate these areas, which had to be targeted because they are the terror infrastructure of Hamas. We've heard people talking about how impossible it is, in the context just before Israel began the Rafah operation, how impossible it was to afford these civilians an opportunity to move. Many of them had already moved before. Well, about 1 million of them were successfully moved or assisted with moving away from that new location of intense fighting between Israel and the terrorist forces, the terrorist army. I think it's important that we understand that the battalions and brigades that Hamas has established within this terror statelet that Israel is engaged in fighting with, doing its utmost at every stage to prevent civilian casualties, and as we see, very tragically, losing soldiers in the process. It is sacrificing its own in order to try and minimize harm to Palestinian civilians. Otherwise, this war would have been over a long time ago.
And Natasha, what do you say to those people? Because I remember I went on social media a couple of weeks ago, and maybe a little bit longer than that, and it seemed on Instagram, every other post on a story was talking about Rafah, the refugee camps, raising awareness. What is going on in Rafah? And because there will be people arguing that that is a refugee camp, and by bombing it, that is a war crime.
GD5 shoes are the absolute best choice for walking, running, and standing. If you're someone who loves being active, or you simply
Why are they sponsored by a fucking shoe company?
2-4 for $20 off orders of $100 or more.
What you have to understand is the terminology of a refugee camp here is also deeply misleading. These are towns that have been established. They still carry that term for historical reasons. So firstly, we're not talking about tent cities here. Where we are talking about...
Okay, well, she's not wrong that not every refugee camp is talking about tent cities, but by now we are talking about tent cities. By now, in like Rafah was one big tent city. Like when you have 90% of the population internally displaced, now that's because they were warned. They were warned to leave. That's how these warnings work. Yeah.
Tent encampments as a result of civilians having been evacuated. Unfortunately, we also have footage of terrorists spying from within those supposedly safe areas also. But this idea that the world seemed to support...
Not safe area. There is no safe area in Gaza.
Israel in the first few weeks of this war understood Israel's war objectives, which were...
Oh, wait, sorry, I should add. There's no safe area in Gaza because Hamas won't agree to one. That's the reason why. Because you have to have two sides to set up a safe zone. Anyway.
To defeat Hamas, prevent them from ever posing a threat as they did on the 7th of October again, and recover the hostages. And while those aims seemed to garner international support at the outset, the moment it came to Rafah, those aims were thrown out of the window. This notion that Hamas could be defeated without Israel going into Rafah as it had done with other parts of the Gaza Strip was simply nonsensical. So I think, again, you've got logic and facts being left behind and people feeling under increasing pressure, if we're talking about policymakers, to adopt this propaganda narrative, these falsehoods, which in the context, as I've described, of decades of the groundwork being laid for this, of this being essentially the oldest hatred in the world, in a modern manifestation, the new acceptable face of anti-Semitism, I mean, that underpins why you've got, I think, so many people taking leave of their senses. When you actually listen to the experts here, and actually Rafah is a case in point, John Spencer, who is the head of urban armed conflict at West Point, has written and spoken extensively about the measures that Israel has taken, including in Rafah, to prevent civilian casualties. Now, he talks about it from the perspective of a professional soldier, and he's also been embedded with the IDF on the ground in Gaza. But if you step back from that, and I'm not a professional soldier, but I am a lawyer, and I have dealt with the law of armed conflict for many a year, there are key rules of international law that govern how armies conduct their operations, including in Rafah. Amongst them, the key principles are necessity, distinction, proportionality, and precaution. And what we see in terms of the misrepresentations, I'm afraid, is both the factual situation on the ground being misrepresented, but also the applicable law. A case in point is the principle of proportionality. It is perhaps the...
Yeah, dude. Nobody understands international law. Nobody does. Nobody knows anything.
Most misrepresented, indeed misunderstood.
In the media, misproportionate all the time. Nobody knows it. Nobody knows what proportionality means. Nobody knows what passive precautions mean. Nobody knows what human shielding it. Nobody knows anything.
Aspect of international law, period. Proportionality is not about totting up casualty figures. It is not about comparing figures on both sides. That would be utterly macabre. It's not how international law works, but also it would simply incentivize Hamas to continue their tactic, their military tactic of using civilians as human shields to drive up the civilian casualty count, which forms part of their overall strategy of using public opinion and pressure on Israel to try and achieve its aim of survival. But when you consider what proportionality actually means in international law, which is a requirement on the individual military commander to conduct a balancing exercise, to weigh up the anticipated military advantage of a strike that is necessary, and that also distinguishes between civilians and combatants, to weigh up the anticipated military advantage of a strike against the expected civilian or collateral damage. Now, there's no...
It's a ex ante standard, first of all, so it's not based on results. So, like, let's say a strike kills one civilian and, one Hamas commander and 5 million civilians. 5,000 civilians. It's like that strike, although in results it may be disproportionate, right? because proportionality is examined on a ex ante standard based on forecasts that the commanders made, based on what a reasonable expectation of civilian harm would be. So just because the strike has a large number of casualties associated with it does not mean it's disproportionate, because you don't know the facts that the commander had at the time. Yeah, and then it's not about how many civilians both sides kill. It's about weighing the expected damage to civilian and civilian objects versus the expected military gain. Yeah.
A strict formula for that. It will vary on a case-by-case basis. But the idea that anyone outside of that calculation process, who does not know the significance of whatever target was the subject of the strike, who does not know even the numbers in terms of real casualty figures that came out, the idea that anyone on YouTube or a podcaster or on social media can determine whether or not the principle of proportionality has been upheld is ludicrous. And legally illiterate, ultimately.
He's not entirely wrong, obviously, because there's plenty of people who just go, look at a strike on Rafah. Whatever, the 2 Hamas commanders killed versus 200 fucking people died, and like they don't understand how proportionality works, so they're like, oh, that's disproportionate, whatever. But we read about this strike, the strike in Jabalia, the refugee camp, I think killed 120 civilians versus 1 Hamas commander. If you... you can... If the military itself starts making statements on it, as they did in this case, 120 dead. I'm pretty sure the IDF made statements in this case, literally saying like, oh, we expected a large number of civilian casualties from this. In that case, you can start arguing proportionality if you actually start having this information. But
those that know how the Israeli defense forces work and know what role military lawyers play understand the importance that Israel places, not just on upholding international law, but I have to stress also in going way above the requirements of the laws of armed conflict. And other military professionals in other armies will frequently say, the British Army, we wouldn't be in a position to uphold the standards that Israel is in this unprecedented military context, urban armed conflict where their enemy has spent 16 years embedding themselves in civilian infrastructure. That is unprecedented. And the way that Israel weighs up these delicate exercises and has banks of targets approved by the Military Advocate General Corps, the army lawyers in advance, is critical to the way any law-abiding state and army needs to conduct its armed conflict. But
that's another big thing. The MAG Corps, the MAG Corps are like international lawyers that are integrated into Israel's army.
It goes even above that because it issues warnings of strikes before these happen. These are warnings that, of course, give Hamas the opportunity to ready themselves, as well as civilians the opportunity to escape. These are warnings delivered by loudspeaker, by text message to individual householders, by phone calls, by leaflets, by setting up humanitarian corridors with indications of where civilians should flee through. Now, all of that does take the principle of precaution that Israel is adopting to, I think, unprecedented levels in the history of armed conflict. But the flip side of it is, what is Hamas doing in this context? Despite these unprecedented measures that Israel is taking, we have reports of Hamas shooting civilians as they sought to flee, according to these instructions, right at the start of this war. We've had reports of them bombing fleeing convoys of civilians. And when we come to think about the images that you have rightly raised and these casualty figures which are being touted around the world, this is an important matter of context.
Oh, say the Hamas casualty figures that are all fake. Say it, do it.
Consideration. Because those images and these Hamas propaganda casualty figures that are being circulated without qualification.
I mean, the casualty figures are not accurate. We know that, but like it, one, I mean, it's even if Hamas was dedicated to, absolutely fully dedicated to displaying accurate casualty numbers, there obviously would be no way for them to effectively do so because every hospital in Gaza has been damaged or destroyed. So there's no way that you can track all the deaths in this type of war. There's no way. Now, we know that because of the way these numbers are reported, we haven't done the Israel and Palestine stuff in a while. They're relying on the reliable media reports, which are not reliable. I think at one point they were literally passing around, the fucking Google form that families would just report people dead in, to try to track the number of people dead. And we know there are specific examples where we know the numbers cannot be correct because the Gaza Media Office was in charge of counting casualties in the north, and the Gazan Health Ministry was in charge of all the casualties, and we can compare the numbers to figure out how many people died in the north in a given period of time, and sometimes they are literally impossibly low. So I think an analysis reported fatalities on October 17th in the Al-Ali hospital blast in Gaza City. A list of the dead published on October 26th by the Health Ministry and the detailed public emergency reports published on December 11th and December 31st also indicated underreporting with male deaths. Palestinian fatality data transferred to the OCHA, that's a UN agency, is at timestamped at 5:30 p.m., which would not include the deaths from the explosion. Hamas reported 471 deaths from the explosion, but only reported 478 additional deaths between 6 p.m. October 17th and the same time October 18th, implying that just 7 Gazans died during the 24-hour period separate from the hospital explosion. OCHA itself notes in its October 18th flash update that the Gaza Ministry reported 62 Gazans were killed in 2 airstrikes in the I don't pronounce that, in Jabalia refugee camps on that October 17th. Thus, the separate incidents would have here accounted for 533 deaths, and Gazans likely died in other circumstances during that period as well. Yeah. So, like, we have cases like this where there's literally a impossibly, like, this is, like, flat out contradicting each other, impossibly low number of deaths reported by them. Yeah. And then there's also the data. It's also tracking literally any death in the Gaza Strip. So that's death of natural causes. That's death from Hamas itself, because Hamas kills dissidents. It will kill people it doesn't like, and a certain number of rockets misfire and land in their own territory and kill people. Yeah, it's not just deaths from the war or anything.
They don't provide the context. They don't tell you how many civilians and how many combatants out of those total numbers. They also don't tell you how these civilians or combatants are said to have been killed and how many of them have been shot.
Can you say RIP? So he just died. Who is this? I have no clue who this person is. My friend. Oh, or RIP, your friend. Okay.
Shot by Hamas, or how many of them have been killed by Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad rockets that fall short in the Gaza Strip, killing civilians indiscriminately. Because unlike the targeted strikes that Israel conducts, which is subject to that proportionality analysis and subject to distinction, precaution, military necessity, Hamas's rockets fall indiscriminately. They kill civilians, they kill aid workers. More recently, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, again, the so-called moderates in this equation, have accused Hamas of deliberately shooting aid workers in order to manufacture a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. They have also, Hamas has now in the last few weeks been videoed attacking civilians who are seeking either to access.
Fucking hell, I wish I remembered the exact thing. Okay, basically, Hamas doesn't just indiscriminately kill civilians. Hamas discriminately kill civilians. They intentionally go after civilian targets and target civilians. They discriminately kill civilians. The rockets are indiscriminate, but okay, the way international law works, in order to be accused, you have to be acting with, in order to fail in distinction, in order to fail in targeting, and not in proportionality. Usually, indiscriminate attacks fail in proportionality, not in distinction. In order to fail in distinction, you have to be acting with purpose. You have to be acting with the purpose to kill civilians in order to fail in distinction. Versus if you just fail in, if you're acting with a lower level of intent, if you're acting with knowledge or you're acting with recklessness, that's a failure in proportionality, usually. There is an argument to be made that using what are called inherently indiscriminate weapons, such as Hamas's rockets or cluster bombs, which I think Israel has used. I don't think Israel's used cluster bombs in this war, but Israel has used cluster bombs in the past. Then you are acting with purpose. You are failing in not only proportionality, they preclude each other. You're not failing in proportionality, you're failing in distinction. There is an argument to be made there. And also, because I misspoke there, you can't fail both in proportionality and distinction. You can only fail in one or the other. They preclude each other. Any proportionality failure implies that attack was lawfully directed at a military target. So it's not, they preclude each other. You can't fail in both with one individual strike.
Access, aid, or even distribute it. So one of the other massive canards here is that Israel is restricting humanitarian assistance into the Gaza Strip. I mean, you just need to look at the stats.
They are restricting humanity. They are.
Put out by COGAT. COGAT is the unit of the Israeli Defense Forces that is responsible for the provision of the civilian communities in any armed conflict.
Natasha,
Yeah.
so I suppose
I wish I had the graph. I'm sure we can look it up. Trucks. entering Gaza per day. Now, this isn't a perfect metric, but it does. This is not the graph I'm looking for per day. Graph. There's a better graph I like that actually shows when it falls over or under the number of trucks entered, or the number of trucks necessary to like sustain or to avoid famine. God damn it. I don't know. I have it somewhere in my fucking notes. But importantly, the thing like the ICC is going after Netanyahu and the defense minister for, to do with the blockade and restricting humanitarian aid is the use of starvation as a method in warfare. Importantly, it doesn't require any type of special intent the way genocide does. All it requires is that starvation would follow in the ordinary course of events from the blockade, basically. So, if it is predictable that starvation would follow in the ordinary course of events of not letting aid trucks in, which Israel hasn't letting aid trucks in, then there's a very strong argument to be made that they are committing starvation as a method of warfare, at least under international law. I don't really like the way that's phrased because it kind of implies intent, but I think it's in my ICC stuff. Yeah, so charges against that. Oh, maybe it's not in here. I don't know. Fuck.
Pose the next question for me.
We haven't done it in a while. So
When
I
you
don't
fight
know.
a war, there are various aspects to war. There's obviously the conflict, but there's also the propaganda war, the perceptions of both of the participants in the war. Do you think that Israel is losing the propaganda war?
I don't think that's a difficult question to answer at all. I mean, you just need to look at how public opinion has embraced wholly the narrative of the terrorists here. No, absolutely. And I was interviewed very early on, I think even on the 8th of October, when the world was seemingly with Israel. And I said to the Sky presenter, remember this time, because it won't last long. And at some point in the not too distant future, the propaganda narrative will have taken over, and we will have forgotten not just how this recent war began, but also the 76 years that came before it. Because the 7th of
Here it is. Easiest case of murder Israel is a crime of starvation. Oh, what the fuck? Okay. Crime of starvation in Gaza Strip, even if the intention is only to prevent goods from getting to Hamas, the fact that starvation of the civilian population will follow in the ordinary course of events is enough to establish the crime.
of October wasn't new. This is
Article 30.
just the latest in a long line of genocidal acts that were committed against Jews in the Middle East, even before the establishment of the State of Israel. The Hebron massacre in 1929. I mean, there was no propaganda narrative then on there being an opposition to the existence of Israel. No, Jews have been killed because they are Jews for thousands of years. But of course, all of that has been eradicated by what we have seen in terms of the social media discussions, in terms of the Al Jazeera narrative, which has been circulated as though it is a responsible news agency, without regard for the fact that it is the Hamas propaganda arm. So undoubtedly, yes, that propaganda.
Hamas propaganda arm is harsh. It's a Qatari state-funded news agency that does obviously champion the Palestinian cause, we'll say.
At war, forgive me, has indeed, I think, already been lost. But that's not to say that those of us that know better shouldn't continue to be standing up for the truth and the reality and seeking to do our utmost to educate against that very propaganda.
Do you think one of the reasons, if we follow the logic of everything you're saying, let's just for the sake of argument, as we do with all, I guess, to interrogate the argument, assume everything you're saying is true. Part of the problem I see is the logic of what you're saying is this. Gaza is run by Hamas. Hamas are terrorists. They've spent 16 years building up terrorist infrastructure everywhere. They've made it essentially so that the entire area of Gaza is a terrorist base. Every mosque, every hospital, every area, every tunnel can be and is being used for that. The logical conclusion of that, following international law, proportionality, and all the rest of it, Israel is going to have to flatten all of Gaza.
This is a good pushback from him. I didn't expect him to make it.
Some people would say is flattening all of Gaza because they have the objective of eliminating Hamas. But if Hamas controls everything and is using every facility in Gaza to do so, the inevitable consequence is you're going to have no buildings left. You're just going to have rubble and millions of people displaced. And however proportional or appropriate that might be in the context of whatever, it's kind of hard to win a propaganda war on that basis if your objective is to flatten an entire.
this is a good this is actually a good pushback from him. Yeah.
Area and move it to all the people there nowhere because they're not being allowed into Egypt or into neighboring countries.
Well, I'm not suggesting that Israel should be winning a propaganda war here. I'm saying that we need to defeat the propaganda war that is subverting.
What I'm saying is, like, I don't see how if we're following the logic of what you're saying, then that has to be Israel's military objective. I don't see how that's ever going to be palatable to people who are looking at that situation.
Well, the logical conclusion is.
It's also, especially when you bring into the argument as well, that you could do a ceasefire with Hamas. They are open to a ceasefire that maintains their role in the Gaza Strip. Now, the argument against this, obviously, then 10 years from now, there would just be another fucking October 7th. But yeah, you could also, and you bring in the hostages too. Like, if you do a ceasefire, you get the hostages back, or at least the hostage's body. Yeah, I think there's a good argument to be made for a ceasefire, especially. Or they could like release hostages. I don't know. Well, that's true. Well, yeah, it's wild. There's all this international pressure on Israel, but not on Hamas. Now, obviously, there's like there aren't as many groups funding Hamas, so it kind of makes sense. But you know, there are not as many groups funding Hamas, or at least are at all interested in it, in pressuring Hamas to do anything different than they're already doing.
I accept that Israel is stuck between a rock and a hard place because the situation has got so bad in the Gaza Strip that it is having to make very difficult decisions. And this war has been dragged out, not just because of the enormous precautions that Israel is taking, but also because of the repercussions of what you've described as the propaganda war. And undoubtedly, and this has been remarked on by many officials, American pressure on Israel has drawn this conflict out. It has said, you have to pull this tooth very, very slowly. And that has caused more casualties, undeniably, on both sides because of the manner in which Israel has been held back from achieving some of its military objectives here.
I don't know if I believe that. I feel like most of the U.S. pressure has been pretty focused on, like, maybe you can make that argument for some of the Rafah stuff, maybe, but most of the U.S. pressure has been pretty focused on humanitarian aid and warnings. These hostages and apologize for being terrorists and then grow the hell up. We can't reward the adult version of a temper tantrum in the form of terrorism. Bro. I like most of the U.S. pressure. It's not. And maybe it's something because Rafah was our red line, right? And I think technically we just said we were opposed to an invasion of Rafah. What's up, Connor? It's been a perk. Welcome back. Until Israel provided a better plan for civilian evacuation. Can I get a hell yeah, brother? Bro, my hair. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know.
Yeah, I completely accept what you're saying, but those are the realities of the situation. And I come back to my earlier point about the international community's contribution here. That is the unfortunate result of what happened after Israel's withdrawal in 2005 from the Gaza Strip. When, again, this is also not just about Hamas firing onto Israeli civilians, it's also about what they do to their own people. In 2007, when they violently took over the Gaza Strip, they threw their opposition Fatah members off of the roofs of buildings. They have used children to dig the tunnels, some of whom have died.
Why is this so funny sped up? We watch everything sped up because you get used to it. It's not even funny.
They have subjugated their people for 16 years. They are also executing them in the street. I mean, all of this is an important facet of what it is that you're rightly picking up on in terms of how on earth, where do we go from here? But the starting point has to be, and I think this has been proven to be correct now on multiple occasions, if you are going to have any chance of releasing further hostages, then you have to apply military pressure to Hamas. Only in the last few days, even Associated Press, I think, had been acknowledging that Netanyahu was correct in this respect. It achieved the first deal at the end of, it was in November.
I mean, I mostly agree with this. Hamas, I think, Hamas deal, PA. Well, I think they finally, we read this, they finally have sort of caved in to possibly giving up control to Gaza Strip in exchange for safe passage to Turkey. I think the Hamas leaders literally want to fucking, they want like free flights to Turkey, which like, I mean, obviously, if Israel can actually get Hamas to stop ruling the Gaza Strip just in exchange for free flights to Turkey, they should absolutely do that. But it's just funny. It's just like so obviously like they're just so self-centered and don't care about it says January. don't care about their own people. They just care about their safe flight to Turkey.
The ceasefire fell apart on the 1st of December, and it has, on several occasions now, caused Hamas to come to the negotiating table because they are starting to feel the military pressure. On each of those occasions, however, lots of the international rhetoric that we have been talking about, which plays into Hamas's hands, seems to have, in various respects, caused those negotiations to fail. But
this is from open source intel. I don't know how trustworthy this necessarily is. Lead documents for negotiations, Hamas revealed the militia's demands, monetary compensation, security guarantees for their leaders, safe passage to Turkey in return to confiscated funds, and the lifting of bans on their foreign bank accounts. The suffering Gaza residents as a result of Hamas's actions is notably absent from their concerns. Hasn't been community noted or anything, but I don't know. I don't necessarily know if this is trustworthy or not. Zionmerch.com. I don't trust anything this guy says. He's selling Zionist merch.
I completely accept, the difficulties of the situation that you're presenting. This is, in many respects, a lose-lose situation for Israel. And it is because the IDF in particular is so committed to minimizing civilian casualty and to doing its utmost that Hamas has been taking advantage of this.
Sure, but I guess what I'm saying, Natasha, and I think you're a very smart and clearly very logical person, you must see what I'm saying. If the end result of what Israel has to do in this line of argument is to destroy all of Gaza, you can see why there'd be a lot of people who'd be uncomfortable about that.
Well, I don't think Israel has ever said that that is what it
but
is
the
planning to
logical
do.
conclusion of your arguments is that that's what's going to happen.
I also don't quite accept that, Constantine,
Okay.
because you and I, neither of us know, the intricate nature of the situation on the ground to be able to make that assessment. We, in many respects, have to accept what Israel is saying, which is that there are military plans that it can follow through on in pursuit of those objectives. One aspect of this that you actually did touch on that would make it clearly a lot easier to do is the possible evacuation of civilians through to Egypt. That's something that I just don't hear people talking about. It was actually in accordance with Egypt's obligations under international law, under a separate convention on refugees, the African Union Convention on Refugees, which Egypt acceded to in 1980, which has a much broader definition of refugee than the international convention. Egypt has an obligation to facilitate the passage across the Rafah border for all of those civilians that are fleeing civil disorder, and it has done for the last 9 months, and it has failed to do so. Now, why would that be a game changer?
I guess that's a... I guess I never thought about that. Israel or Egypt probably actually does have an obligation under international law to accept refugees. I understand why they don't. One, because the public argument, at least, our surface level argument is, well, they don't want to support the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, and the people led into Egypt would never be allowed back to their homes. The Palestinians would just be pushed out forever. And then the real thing, which Egypt president has said also openly, is that they're worried about Hamas operating out of the Sinai, and then Egypt could be dragged into conflict with Israel. Yeah.
And why, and I'll come on to why this is so significant that nobody's talking about this. It would be a game changer because in Egyptian Rafah, which is just the other side of the border, which is the start of the Sinai Desert, you have unlimited space to create a safe zone where you can take civilians away from Hamas, where you can provide them with humanitarian assistance, which is not diverted to Hamas, and you can protect them both from Palestinian aggression.
You're assuming that Hamas wouldn't go in there too. Hamas would obviously try to operate out of there.
And from Israel's military activities in the Gaza Strip. The reason I find it impossible to understand or give credit, let me say, to people who suggest that they are standing up and defending the Palestinians when they attack Israel, or they call for an immediate ceasefire before the hostages have been released, or before Hamas has been destroyed. If these people truly had the interests of the Palestinians at heart, then they would be calling, as I have done since October, for Egypt to comply with its international law obligations. Because all of the difficulties that you describe in the logical conclusion of what Israel has to do are significantly mitigated by that. Because these civilians are taken out of harm's way. And then Israel is in a much, much better position to specifically target Hamas terror infrastructure and specifically the terrorists. Because if, for the sake of argument, it is successful in eliminating these terrorists, then the structures that you have in place are significantly less important.
So then why doesn't Egypt do that?
You'll have to ask the Egyptians,
Well,
I'm afraid.
not many countries would want to take millions of refugees. I mean, the UK wouldn't want to take millions of refugees from France, mainly because we don't like the French. But you know what I mean, right? So that's a fairly reasonable thing for a country not to want to do.
But the suggestion isn't that Egypt embraces these refugees, say as Israel did with refugees from the Arab world, and give them citizenship and take them into their communities. Absolutely not. the suggestion has always been that they provide a safe zone away from Hamas. And then when Hamas is destroyed, that there is every intention and opportunity for these civilians to return. So that's the difficulty
Return to what,
aspect.
though?
Well, return to a Gaza Strip that will have to be rebuilt with international cooperation, but significantly also with the input of those neighboring states that understand the importance of de-radicalization.
I like that we're getting to pro-Palestine. What's his name? Constantine or something? I think it's something like that. He's finally. I mean, he's a good interviewer. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but they are really good interviewers. They are able to actually fucking push back against people on both sides.
I mentioned Saudi in the textbooks earlier. The UAE, of course, is also has a significant track record and understands what it is that needs to be done in terms of de-radicalization or denazification, if you will, because that went hand in hand with the Marshall Plan, with the rebuilding of Germany. But that's critical. And as long as we, sitting here, the international community, refuse to accept that the significant, pivotal, critical role that indoctrination has played and that incentivization to terror plays in perpetuating this conflict, then I'm afraid we're not going to get to any of the logical conclusions that you set out, because this is not going to be defeatable. That has to be the major shift now.
And look, it's a great point, but let's also be honest about this. It's not just about what's happening in Gaza or Rafah. You look at Iran. Iran are funding a lot of these terrorist organizations. You have Lebanon as well, with Hezbollah. I mean, it's not just as simple. I'm not saying you're saying this, by the way, but as Palestine, how do you deal with that with countries who are overt in their rhetoric when it comes to saying that they want Israel wiped off the map?
Well, you take them seriously for starters, and the unprecedented step that we saw with Iran firing on Israel directly. I mean, you're absolutely right, Francis, that it's used proxies to attack not just Israel, but also Western interests around the world for decades.
Now, to be fair, the strike on Israel from Iran was only after Israel striked the consulate building next to the embassy in, I think it was Syria.
And the manner in which the Lebanon government has failed to prevent Hezbollah from firing onto Israeli civilians in the north of the country for the last 9 months. Again, something nobody ever speaks about. Tens of thousands of Israeli civilians have been evacuated, have spent 9 months away from their homes. They cannot return to the north because it is under constant fire by Hezbollah terrorists, another Iranian proxy, in the north of the country. That is in breach of a UN resolution 1701, which promised that there would be no Hezbollah presence south of the...
That's another... First of all, I forget, is this a General Assembly or is this... No, the Security Council. Oh yeah, because this was what ended the second Lebanon. Okay, anyway, what's the thing?
It was called the Blue Line, the one Iranian proxy in the north of the
the return of people from the north is another big reason a lot of people, even in Israel, want a ceasefire, because it would allow people to return to the north in Israel, because the Hezbollah war would likely die down after a ceasefire in Gaza.
Is in breach of a UN resolution 1701, which promised that there would be no Hezbollah presence south of what was called the Blue Line, the Litani River, threatening the north of Israel. There was even a UN force, UNIFIL, that was set up in order to ensure that that provision was met. I mean, the international community has become a laughingstock in the context of these reassurances, which were never followed up. And what you're describing in the context of the wider war against the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism, Iran, is significant, because instead of stringent sanctions, we have seen a willingness to negotiate with an entity that has taken American hostages, that has threatened British nationals, as well as posing this existential threat. Let's call it what it is, to Israel.
This brings me to a question that is very professionally insulting to you, but not personally insulting, I hope, which is, isn't international law just a thing, just like a fig leaf we put over the fact that the world is governed by realpolitik, and ultimately no one really cares because there's no...
Where's Copeland? Okay, he'd like this. When
I was at university many moons ago and was studying international rights for the first time, I was told that most states adhere to most international law most of the time, and therefore it is a net good. We could have a whole separate session on the merits of international law. Is it a legal system? Is it essentially international diplomacy and politics? But the fact of the matter is that so much of the last 9 months have been discussed in the context of international legal terminology.
But this is what I'm saying. I'm sorry to interrupt. This is exactly what I'm saying. I feel like all it is an opportunity for soundbitism from you. You clearly are pro-Israel, so you will say, Hezbollah, Egypt, they're all in breach of their obligations under various aspects of international law. And the pro-Palestine people will say, well, Israel is the only state that hasn't complied with its UN resolution X, Y, Z, whatever. And everyone just uses it basically to back up their argument, and no one actually cares because it's not a law like the law of this land, where if you don't follow it, someone's going to come and put you in prison.
I do disagree.
Okay.
I do care about it because I think it is being misrepresented. And that is critical. I mean, I completely understand what you're saying. The difference.
Okay, I would probably agree that number one, most states follow international law most of the time, which is why it's important. And then also, it is being misrepresented heavily. I think it's I think most international law is actually based on a pretty good moral framework. I think it's actually a pretty good moral framework to uphold. So it is probably, it's probably important to understand it and to hopefully try to uphold it correctly.
Difference is that I've given you chapter and verse, and when people say Israel breaks international law or UN resolutions, invariably they can't name one because there isn't a single UN Security Council Chapter 7 resolution, which is the only resolution that is ever legally binding, that Israel is in breach of. People are.
I think Chapter 7 resolutions are the only one that are enforceable, but I think there are other resolutions that are legally binding. What chapter UN resolutions, I can't spell, are binding? Chapter, yeah. I don't trust Google AI at all. This is, oh, that is chapter 7. Here's scholars have various opinions on this question. See, for example, that's enough politics today. Thanks to the viewers who tuned in. Nonfon is speaking to Adult Swim momentarily. Be watching Aqua Teen Hunger Force. I should do that. Enforceable versus binding UN Security Council resolutions. Resolution by Security Council legally binding. All 6 viewers can leave. The cartoon viewers can stay. Okay, binding under, this is chapter 7, are generally considered legally binding. Recent Gaza ceasefire resolution is considered binding by many experts, despite lacking explicit chapter 7 language because it demands action. Enforceability. While binding resolutions can create legal obligation, enforcement mechanisms enforcement refers to mechanisms to compel compliance. Fuck, I forget. But I'm fairly certain because only the Security Council can actually authorize force to enforce resolutions. And I think they can only do that for chapter 7 resolutions. But I think other resolutions are legally binding.
Using international legal terminology, but they are abusing it. And this.
Yeah. See how this is, it's not chapter 7, but because of the language it uses, it still could potentially be legally binding. Although we said it's not legally binding.
This is the whole concept of lawfare, right? This is, I say, an abuse of international law, not its.
It has been established for several decades that resolutions not explicitly adopted under Chapter 7 can just as well contain legally binding obligations. The International Court of Justice famously stated in the Namibia Advisory Opinion, it's been contended that Article 25 of the chapter applies only to enforcement measures adopted under Chapter 7 of the Charter. It's not possible to find any in the Charter. It's not possible to find in the Charter support for this view. Article 25 is not confined to decisions in regard to enforcement action, but applies to the decisions of the Security Council adopted in accordance with the Charter. Moreover, that article is placed in Chapter 7, but not immediately after Chapter 24. But immediately after Article 24, in that part of the Charter, which deals with its functions and the powers of the Security Council. There's just both a textual and systematic argument that made Article 25 UN Charter extends to all decisions of the Security Council. Not necessarily explicitly, or it's not necessary to explicitly use the word decide for a resolution to be legally binding. Okay.
Proper application. And that feeds into the question that you're posing because it undermines the international legal order. It undermines the credibility of international law. And international law does exist, and it provides a framework for states to be able to interact with each other in a mutual understanding context framework, which is important. It's extremely significant for the way that we conduct ourselves internationally and for the proper maintenance of international diplomacy. But it is being subverted. international law is being turned on its head with these modern blood libels. And we come back to what started this discussion in terms of genocide and apartheid. These are both international legal terms that have a clear meaning, which are being lied about.
Well, let's talk about apartheid. So can you tell us what apartheid means and why that doesn't apply to what's happening? Because, again...
Okay, wait, before... Intricate arts of the resolution binding. The language each part of resolution determines whether it's binding or not. Anyway, I don't know. A lot of people say Chapter 6 resolutions, though, aren't legally binding, especially pro-Israel, because UN Resolution 242, which requires Israel to withdraw from territories occupied, which is controversial, after the Six-Day War, is a Chapter 6 resolution, which arguably is not legally binding. But then it also just says territories occupied and not the territories occupied, which makes it complicated. Yeah. And the draft of the resolution explicitly said that they specifically chose the language territories occupied, not the territories occupied, because they didn't want Israel to withdraw from all the territories occupied after October 7th. Just some of them, because they didn't like the Green Line. Yeah. But then also the settlements are probably illegal, and also the annexation parts are probably illegal, but the occupation itself might not be illegal, but you can do the illegal thing. It's kind of, don't worry about it.
Often confused about. Are you tired of tossing and turning on this hot earth bedding regular deal? Simply visit cozyearth.com and use our code Triggernometry to get 35% off. With a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty, you and I can invest in quality and durability with complete peace of mind. Visit cozyearth.com to enjoy 35% off and use our code Triggernometry at checkout. Transform your sleep and stay cool with Cozy Earth.
Well, it references the state of affairs in South Africa, where you had a part of the community that was treated as other. And in South Africa, there was racial discrimination against the blacks. They did not have equal rights to the whites. The reason that apartheid is being deployed falsely against Israel is because in the international legal context, apartheid by precedence has consequences. Apartheid means sanctions. That is what happened to South Africa. And that's the reason it's being deployed against Israel, because of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement intention to try and legitimize its position to boycott the only Jewish state.
Do Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank have the same rights as Israelis?
Well, that's not a proper comparison, because I explained that the Palestinians have an autonomy in the West Bank. They have self-governance in Gaza. So what you have is, let's talk about Israel for starters. You do have equality between all Israeli citizens, Arabs and Jews. Arab Israelis serve in every area of Israeli society. They're in the police. They're also in the army. They serve. The
big comeback to this is going to be the admissions council and some of the state land stuff. So the admissions councils are, hopefully they're not going to bring it up because they're fucking pro-Israel. But the big thing, the admission councils are like are councils for Israeli neighborhoods that I think technically are allowed to discriminate to maintain the character of the neighborhood, which can include excluding non-Jewish people. I don't even think it's just specifically Arabs, but I didn't do a ton of reading on them. Admissions councils. And then there's something else as well with the state land stuff. So on a basis of arbitrary and racist criteria that perceive their social suitability to the social and cultural fabric of the community, given the community's broad discretion, they used a vague subjective criteria and their composition, which includes a representative from the Jewish Agency or World Zionist Organization. The law creates a de facto situation wherein these communities can reject interested residents who are Palestinian citizens of Israel, or as well members of other marginalized groups, solely on the basis of their race, ethnicity, religion, or other identity. In 2023, they passed a new thing which expands the law's scope. Yeah. Shit. There was another thing I remember. I think a lot of the land in Israel is state land, which also I think can apply. Oh, damn, which is also discriminatory things in, I think. This is 1965. Ownership, the leases, Israeli land administration distinguishes between urban land and agricultural land. They cannot lease land to foreign nationals. practice foreigners may be allowed to, at least if they are eligible to immigrate to Israel in accordance with the law of return. Fuck.
As
Yeah.
doctors, as lawyers, as school teachers. I worked at the Israeli Supreme Court under the former Chief Justice Miriam Naor. One of the other judges was an Arab. He put both an Israeli president and a prime minister, both of them Jewish, behind bars. So the notion that there is any lack of equality within Israel is simply not correct. Anyone who's actually gone to visit Israel will probably see the diversity that exists, and especially Muslims, Jews,
Wait,
Christians.
what are... We'll finish watching this, but why are so many people in this? What are they talking about right now?
Can you hear me?
Boss isn't even there. Okay.
Living side by side and getting on with their lives. It's important in that context to recognize that, in fact, it's only in Israel that Arabs are able to live as free citizens of a democracy. They are the only free Arabs in the Middle East. And that is really without question. You can talk about divisions within Israeli society. You can talk about the history of Israel being attacked since its very existence by surrounding Arab states, and what that means in terms of the way that individuals conduct themselves or prejudices that they may hold, both sides. But you cannot say that there is a legal system that differentiates between Arab and Jew and that treats them unequally. As a matter of law, that is simply not the case. But may I just come on to what you've asked about the rest of the Palestinian-controlled territories? Because...
Well, they're not fully controlled by the Palestinians, let's be honest, right?
True!
Israel is able to prevent people from leaving.
Holy shit, we actually... Dude, this guy isn't good at... Listen. Some of the stuff that happened with his oh fuck, there's especially his Ukraine takes and what he said on Destiny made me lose some respect from him, but like this is actually good pushback here.
Leaving that area or going to that area. Israel has military control of both those areas.
True, they have checkpoints, they have military controls, they have bypass roads that only Israelis are allowed to use. There are multiple cases we can look at of Israeli soldiers fucking killing unarmed Palestinians for no reason.
West Bank is a whole other conversation about what Israel's doing there, right?
Right, well, let's be clear about the areas we're talking about. Even if we're looking at Gaza, and you will frequently hear people say that Israel controls Gaza, absolutely. Clearly that's not the case, because Hamas built a terror state there for the last 16 years. That would not have been possible if Israel controlled it. We have seen since Israel became active in Rafah and took part of the Rafah crossing, which is the border between Gaza and Egypt, we've seen the magnitude of the tunnels that existed, which meant that essentially those weapons from Iran that you have referred to, Iranian support for Hamas and other terror proxies, were flowing freely into the Gaza Strip through Egypt. So that's not the case with respect to Gaza. Israel has had no control there since the withdrawal. With respect to the West Bank, Area A is entirely controlled by the Palestinians.
There's not no control there. They have a blockade on Gaza. I would agree. I don't think Gaza is occupied, but it is blockaded.
Authority. Area B is under joint control.
The people there aren't allowed to leave without Israeli permission. Now, there are like 40,000 people a month that do cross for various reasons. Yeah, like it's not like it's a total open-air prison or whatever, but they do control what's let in and everything.
The Palestinians have civil control and Israel does maintain military presence there for good reason, which we can come on to in due course. But the reason that these two territories are significant, and it's important to understand that they have self-governance and autonomy, is because the likes of Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch, when they have produced these reports which falsely accuse Israel of apartheid, they also falsely allied the Palestinians living in these areas with the Israeli Arabs. And they say that as a result of those Palestinians not having Israeli citizenship, there is a system of apartheid. That
It's kind of true, yeah.
A grotesque, false portrayal of what the situation is on the ground.
Especially because they, I remember that one Human Rights Watch reports, literally, I think they called all Arab Israelis in Israel Palestinians, when if you poll them, I think only 7% of Arab Israelis in Israel call themselves Palestinians.
And the reason it's so very objectionable is that the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank was created with international backing. It was the result of the Oslo Accords, the Oslo process, that Israel created together with the newly formed Palestinian Authority, that division between areas A, B, and C in the West Bank. And it's also important to...
I remember this. This was so funny to me. This is like literal, like, what? Oh, God damn it. It's unavailable now? He fucking deleted it. Oh, God damn it. It was so funny. I should have clipped it. Yeah, it's on my YouTube somewhere, but there was a debate between like a pro-Palestine like guy, like fucking college student, and some other, I think it was Cam, it was relatively, Cam Higbee, he's a relatively known guy, and the fucking college student was like, you call them Arab Israelis, I prefer to call them Palestinians. It's like, that is like literal, like white savior complex level of analysis there. That's an argument. Human Rights Watch claims that Jewish and Israelis and Palestinians are regarded as separate identity groups that fall within the same broad understanding of a racial group under international human rights law. However, 2020 polls showed that only 7% of Arabs in Israel self-identify as Palestinians. 51% said Arab Israeli, 23% Israeli, 15% Arab, and 4% no answer. Yeah. That's nonsense. The majority of Arab schools in Israel have endless fights with the Israeli education ministry to teach Palestinian history. Majority of Arab Israelis identify as Palestinian. Not according to this poll. This says 7% self-identify as Palestinians.
Note that without Israeli security cooperation with the Palestinian Authority in areas, well, primarily in Area B, because the PA control area
According to Israeli, okay.
entirely, without Israeli security cooperation, there would be nothing to prevent a Hamas takeover of the Palestinian Authority in the same way that they took over the Gaza Strip, throwing their opposition Fatah members off of the roofs of buildings. So again, that's something that people don't seem to be particularly interested in when they are engaging in these false tropes, and apartheid is included there.
Natasha, this is a pretty unpleasant question, but I think it needs to be asked. Do you think Israel has a long-term future when we see what is happening in the region, when we see the outcomes of the war, the way the war is being represented, when you see other countries like Iran openly saying that they want to destroy Israel, as well as Lebanon and other countries as well?
I don't think that Israel has a choice. So not just for the Israelis that are living there, but also for the Jewish people around the world. Because Israel's, one of its key functions is as a safe haven. Because we all know what has been happening to Jewish communities in the last 9 months as a result of this surge of anti-Semitism under the guise of this modern subset of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. We can all see the attacks that Jewish communities are being subject to and the increased rate at which many of these communities are moving to Israel. So Israel doesn't have a choice in terms of long-term survival, either for the existing Israeli citizens or for the Jewish diaspora. It certainly made it through extremely difficult periods in the past. If you think about the formation of the State of Israel, when David Ben-Gurion declared the state on the 14th of May, 1948.
True, and now you have the U.S. backing you.
Yes, the Jewish Yishuv had for many decades already been building up the state institutions in anticipation of declaring itself a state. But it was outnumbered, outgunned, it was immediately attacked.
No, I don't think it was outnumbered or outgunned. No, the Palestinian resistance was not that strong. It was like mostly a few different Arab families, a few different Palestinian Arab families that were organizing a few different militias, and then like the Arab states that sent armies in the 48 war were, and also the Palestinian resistance had already been severely weakened by the crushing of the Arab revolts in Palestine, the 1920 Arab revolt in Palestine that the British fucking crushed. And then it was 1936, there was another Arab revolt, right? 1936 Arab revolt, yeah. 1939, which was also fucking crushed by the British and also Zionists as well. Like the idea that Israel was like severely outnumbered or outgunned in the 48 war is not true. The Arab armies, the Arabs in Palestine were already weakened by the crushing of the Arab revolts, and the Arab leaders were all pretty reluctant to send troops into Palestine, so they sent like a symbolic number of troops. Like a lot of it was not like substantial resistance or anything, but
annihilation by its neighbours. And upon the British withdrawal, and even before that, they had been confiscating arms from the local Jewish community. So it was essentially left completely defenceless, and it managed to survive. And it has fought subsequent wars of intended annihilation, and it has managed to survive. So I don't think, when you have no choice, this isn't, we've heard previous comparisons, this isn't the West fighting a war in Iraq or a war in Afghanistan. This is an army of conscripts, doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, plumbers, carpenters, who, when the country was under attack, didn't wait to be called, because they know the importance of putting on their uniform and defending their families. This is not a country that has a choice. We've seen similar, I would say, bravery amongst Ukrainians who are defending their very lives and the lives of their nearest and dearest. And when one is faced with that kind of existential threat, then these questions as to whether or not Israel will give up or whether it can actually succeed become a great deal less important. And when we see the way that Israel has unified, I know neither of you have been since the 7th of October. I've had the opportunity now to go on a number of occasions, and see the way the country has come together, and not just Jewish Israelis, the way that Arab Israelis have said, "Ein li eretz acheret," I have no other country, is, I think, a remarkable indication of the strength of the will and of the dedication that Israeli citizens have to defend themselves against this unspeakable horror, to push back against these forces of darkness. There's been a lot of talk about forces of light and darkness. It's undeniable that the death cult that is Hamas celebrates death. You see mothers who have children who become martyrs, in their words, who have killed themselves in order to slaughter Jews, and you see that being celebrated, not by all, but you do see instances of that being celebrated. That is the complete inverse of what we see when Israelis are putting on uniform, not just to defend their own families, but also to do their utmost to protect civilians in the context of the war that they're fighting in Gaza.
And it's also, as well, you look at the United States, and the United States has always been a great ally of Israel, but there seems to be more of a hesitancy now to support Israel from within the United States than there has been previously, hasn't there?
Politics plays a significant role in this. And it's extremely troubling when you see the Biden administration coming out with comments that they then suddenly walk back. So, for example, this reference to indiscriminate bombing, which was then very quickly walked back by spokespeople. But you see an awful lot
Was
of
that Biden who said that himself?
Yes, and I appreciate when he's not talking
I don't know if Biden said indiscriminate bombing himself, but
auto cue,
I feel like Biden's done pretty good stuff with Israel.
sometimes, say the wrong thing as far as his
very
hand,
loyally.
Subjectively put.
as far as his hand is concerned. But the problem is that that sort of rhetoric, unintended as it may have been, by the leader of the free world, has dire consequences. We spoke about Iran's direct strike on Israel a little earlier. Well, the context of the weeks leading up to Iran taking that unprecedented move, of increasingly troubling American rhetoric, criticizing Israel, many have said, had an undeniable impact and input into Iran's feeling of confidence of striking Israel directly in that fashion. So the position that is taken by politicians around the world, which is undeniably impacted by focus groups and polling numbers, and is driven by the propaganda war, which you're both very alive to, that inevitably has that knock-on impact on not just Israel's ability to defend itself properly. And that comes into play when we're talking about arms embargoes or additional pressure, or the Americans, for some time saying don't go into Rafah, don't finish the job that we've been backing you for months to complete. But it also inevitably encourages Israel's enemies, Iran certainly, but also Hamas. The notion that still, after month 9, they could be maintaining that they're not going to agree to release hostages in exchange for pauses in the fighting is, I think, undeniably as a result of the encouragement, the succor that they have been provided, and the language that we have heard extremely disappointingly, extremely misguidedly coming out of prominent politicians around the world. In fact, I think David Cameron even acknowledged.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think Hamas would be pretty hard line in that, regardless of what the Biden administration or any other leaders were saying, especially now that, again, we looked earlier at those reports that they seem to even maybe be willing to cede control of the Gaza Strip now, which would be good.
This when he was Foreign Secretary. He said that what had been happening in terms of, and I see it in the context of these calls for an immediate ceasefire, right? That is exactly what Hamas is seeking to achieve. When you think about that rhetoric in the round, the Foreign Secretary was clear that this inevitably impacted Iran's calculation and its willingness to engage Israel directly in that fashion.
And Natasha, so with everything we've discussed, before we ask you our last question, I suppose the most obvious question is, you mentioned your trips to Israel. We know what the situation is and the sentiment is in Gaza and elsewhere. We see what the international context is. You put all that together. Is a two-state solution even going to... I mean, there's clearly no appetite for it in Israel. I don't think there's any appetite for it in Gaza, really, from what I understand. Is that even possible?
What about the Houthi drone hitting Tel Aviv? Maybe. Was it like a month ago by now, or is it new? Houthi drone, Tel Aviv. Oh, no. I didn't hear about this. No. Oh, no. I think a while ago, I heard that Hamas was striking central Israel again. But this is new. No, I haven't heard about this. Hamas strikes central Israel for first time in months. Yeah, I read about this, but I didn't know this is new. This is yeah, this is May. Drone strike near U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv leaves 1 dead. Yemen Houthi rebels claim attack. Yemen's Houthi rebels claim responsibility for a drone strike near a U.S. Embassy branch in the office of Israeli city of Tel Aviv on Friday. They killed at least 1 person and injured several other. Undetected by Israeli radars passing the American fleet in the Red Sea. Damn, that guy has both of us. What the hell? But did hit the embassy. It was close to a couple of American offices. Did not. Yeah. Well, I don't think were they aiming for the embassy, do you think? Or did they not really care? I don't think you're, wait, sorry. I forgot who was talking. I was going to say, I don't think, yeah, I think they're flexing. Yeah. I don't know if they care about hitting an embassy, but I was about to say, yeah, you can't strike embassies under international law. I forgot we're talking about the Houthis right now. Sorry, my bad.
There has been
they
an
don't care
appetite
about
amongst broad swathes of the political spectrum in Israel for it. That has to be seen, of course, in the context, though, of Israelis having spent generations now witnessing every security concession made, leading to blood on the streets. Oslo gave us an intifada. And, I would encourage you and viewers just to Google image search Israel bus bombings to get a sense of the endless number of suicide attacks that were ripping through Israeli communities after that peace agreement, which is still hailed, was signed. One of the foremost commitments under that would have been renouncing terror. That's never something that the Palestinian leadership engaged in. So despite that, I think you have seen significant parts of the Israeli public broadly supportive of the notion of a two-state.
They hit the Iranian one? Oh, yeah, Israel does it too. Technically, Israel hit the consulate building next to it, not the embassy. Yeah. I still don't think you're allowed to do that under international law. And you also, can't do it in Syria without Syria's permission, but also Syria is a failed state, so I don't even know how that fucking works. But yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Solution.
Even now?
Well, I'm going to take some stages if I may. Even in the light of the realities of the situation, I think it was, the broad consensus would have been, well, look, obviously it's not possible unless the Palestinians renounce their genocidal intent towards us, while they are saying, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority also, that the Palestinian future state will be used as a launching pad to conduct its genocidal war against the rest of Israel. That obviously needs to change. But in principle, the hope was there. And of course, if Israel had been living next to Switzerland, there would have been a two-state solution 76 years ago. What you're talking about now is, of course, a different state of affairs, because the Israeli public has been through a trauma. It has had that naivete, which suggested that Hamas might be reformable, beaten out of it in the most brutal way imaginable. And now we're faced with this phrase, two-state solution. I would suggest an empty phrase. I've heard some people referring to it as the two-state delusion. And until we deal with indoctrination and with incentivization to terror, I would also agree that there is nothing to talk about in the context of this empty phrase. But I think there's an additional question that we need to ask ourselves, and that is, what is the damage of continuing to promote a two-state delusion at the expense of doing the hard work of...
Nonfon showing up to the debate panel. I'm about, dude, I will, and it's after this video. I just checked, I saw everyone was in it, and I scrolled up a little, and I saw David was talking about inflation, food prices, gas prices, etc. I will join in like 30 minutes, and I'll talk about inflation with him. Don't tell him I'm coming. He doesn't like me.
Forging a possible future peaceful solution. And when I say hard work, I mean, it starts with getting rid of the indoctrination, getting rid of the incentivization of terror. That's the starting point. And then you have to take generations, at least a generation, to allow that new generation to grow up without being indoctrinated to want to kill all the Jews. And at that point, you can start to talk about what the potential possible solutions are. It's never going to arise out of a handshake in the Rose Garden of the White House, or an American president signing a piece of paper, albeit that the Abraham Accords under the previous administration sent shock points, I think, through those of the political establishment that subscribed to the mantra of former Secretary of State John Kerry. In 2016 at the Savannah conference, he said, "Mark my words, there will never be a separate peace between Israel and the Arab world without a solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict." Well, he looks a little bit silly now. And so do all of...
No, he doesn't look silly. What do you mean he was fucking proven right, dude? Yeah, this whole like capsule theory thing, that Israel can just keep putting off the Palestinian issue forever and ever and ever and try to make peace with all the Arab states. Well, how do you think that makes the Palestinians feel, dude? How do you think it makes the Palestinians feel when they're seeing like every Arab state abandon them? Do you not think they're just going to fucking rise up against Israel at that point? Like,
those that subscribed to that false approach.
When Palestinians aren't included in any of these negotiations, like...
what the Abraham Accords shows us is that people-to-people cooperation, which existed for a significant time before those pieces of paper were signed, economic links, and de-radicalization hold the key to future peace in the Middle East. They held the key to peace in the Middle East in the context of the Abraham Accords, and I think they do so with respect to Israel and the Palestinian Arabs also. But that can never be based on a rewriting of history, on this propaganda war. So we have to be clear that when people say, there was a Palestine and they had their land taken away from them, you cannot have a future peaceful solution which is based on a rewriting of history or false information like that. I am the granddaughter of Palestinians. The British mandate in Palestine, in which there was a local Arab and a local Jewish population, is not in any way, of course, the way it is presented by some as a prior Palestinian state. That is simply a misrepresentation of history. It is false. But what this propaganda war has left us with is this very simple, soundbitey, false narrative, which underpins the promotion of this idea of a two-state solution. But if we come from the right starting point, which includes that this idea of an occupation is a misapplication of international law, and it is not accurate, I don't know if we've got time to go into it now, but there are really fundamental aspects of international law that are being inverted and ridden over roughshod. And actually, it's probably important to just go into it briefly. There is a critical rule of customary international law that determines the borders of newly emerging states at their moment of independence. It is called uti possidetis iuris. It's applied universally wherever there is no agreement to the contrary. So it's the default rule. And in Israel's case, in 1948, it determined that the pre-existing administrative lines of the British mandate that preceded the state of Israel became Israel's international borders when it declared independence. This is the rule that the pre-existing administrative lines become the new lines, the new borders.
I've not heard it. Maybe she's right, but I have not heard about this.
And the reason that it was introduced was to promote stability and certainty and to prevent fratricidal struggles. The international court had just default rule. But you cannot have a peace in Palestine in which there was a local Arab based on was a Palestine and they had their land taken away from them. You cannot have a future peaceful solution which is based on a rewriting of history or false information like that. I am the granddaughter of Palestinians. The British mandate in Palestine, in which there was a local Arab and a local Jewish population, is not in any way, of course, the way it is presented by some as a prior Palestinian state. That is simply a misrepresentation of history. It is false. But what this propaganda war has left us with is this very simple, soundbitey, false narrative, which underpins the promotion of this idea of a two-state solution. But if we come from the right starting point, which includes that this idea of an occupation is a misapplication of international law, and it is not accurate, I don't know if we've got time to go into it now, but there are really fundamental aspects of international law that are being inverted and ridden over roughshod. And actually, it's probably important to just go into it briefly. There is a critical rule of customary international law that determines the borders of newly emerging states at their moment of independence. It is called uti possidetis iuris. It's applied
uti possidetis iuris. Western women and Palestinians, the death of their children is due to their choices.
Firstly, wherever there is no agreement to the contrary. So it's the default rule. And in Israel's case, in 1948, it determined that the pre-existing administrative lines of the British mandate that preceded the state of Israel became Israel's international borders when it declared independence. This is the rule that the pre-existing wherever there is no agreement to the contrary. So it's the default rule. And in Israel's case, in 1948, it determined that the pre-existing
There was also, I mean, there was the 1950 armistice agreements. Like, now those weren't necessarily intended to be the borders, but they weren't intended to be permanent borders. But I mean, there was some agreement there. You can make that argument. I don't know.
Administrative lines of the British mandate that preceded the state of Israel became Israel's international borders when it declared independence. This is the rule that the previous administrative lines become the new lines, the new borders of the state. And the reason that it was introduced was to promote stability and certainty and to prevent fratricidal struggles. The International Court of Justice outlined these justifications for it when it recognized that it had become established. It was introduced in the 19th century, applied in South America with the withdrawal of the Spanish. It's applied in Asia and Africa, also to the dissolution of former communist federations. Ukraine's borders followed Ordi Posidetis Juris. And that's quite a critical comparison, because I think the three of us would agree that Russia has been in occupation of Crimea from Ukraine. Why is that? Because Crimea was part of Ukraine according to the rule of Ordi Posidetis Juris at Ukraine's formation. Well, in the same way, when Israel came into existence, the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza fell within that territory of the administrative lines of the pre-existing British mandate. And that's critical, because immediately in this war of annihilation that I described, Jordan occupies the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Israel, and Egypt occupies Gaza. And that occupation ended in 1967 when Israel recovered that territory. That's when this allegation of occupation for many people is dated from. The problem with that is you cannot occupy what is already your own sovereign territory.
I.e., if Ukraine was to...
I'd have to look more into that, I guess, but that's not what I've not from my reading. Most of the problem is, like, most of the reading I've done is reading on the laws within the framework of it being an occupation. So it's like, I don't know how to attack it not being an occupation at all. Like, the most I can say is, like, clearly this is a military occupation, even if technically under international law it isn't. Like, this is clearly Israel using its military to occupy someone else. I mean, if you can switch water and food at the does it also, she mentioned, like, there's no, this is the default rule. There's no other agreement. Well, what are the Oslo Accords? Like, the Oslo Accords is an agreement that allowed for the occupation, but, like, does the Oslo Accords use the word occupation? Oslo Accords 2 full text. Occupied. Oh, it's probably about settlements, but to be honest, never read it, which I should. What about also 1? Didn't use the word occupation, but yeah.
To retake Crimea and hold it, no one would say that was occupation of Crimea.
From Russia,
Yes.
indeed.
Right, okay.
And that is a stark parallel comparison. Now, what Israel did in 1967 is it applied its law, administration, and jurisdiction in full over East Jerusalem. It reunited the city, but it didn't do so in the West Bank.
I mean, I'm for the most part on Israel's side in the '67 war, but, like,
Instead of applying a temporary framework. Why? Because under the Land for Peace formula, it expected that it would give up some of the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, to Jordan in pursuit of peace. But when the 1994 peace agreement with Jordan finally came about,
I mean, the Land for Peace thing also called it an occupation. It said territories occupied.
didn't want anything to do with the West Bank. So this temporary administrative framework that Israel established in 1967 held until
Also, the mandate did not give them the Sinai, but they did give up the Sinai. So there's that.
Accords and the creation of areas A, B, and C that we've described. But the application of this term occupation it's another blood libel, because it has no basis in international law. It is used as a political term. And the preface to it, this illegal occupation, which is so often referred to, is also only ever applied to Israel. There is no concept of illegal, broadest concept of illegal occupation in international law. And in all the instances...
That's not any. There have been cases of illegal occupation applied to not Israel. For example, Portugal's occupation of Guinea, I think, and then South Africa's occupation of Namibia.
Questions of real occupation in the context of which is envisaged by the Geneva Conventions, and the context of the real transfer of populations in Cambodia,
Rabin
Vietnam,
did
in
die.
Nagorno-Karabakh, in Northern Cyprus.
Rabin was assassinated. Yeah.
None of these cases has this allegation of illegal occupation or illegal settlements even been advanced. So this is another example of...
I don't know if that's true. I think Morocco has also gotten in trouble for their, at least supposedly, illegal settlements in the occupied Western Sahara. That's also another example of potential illegal occupation. Now, I don't know the specifics of the Morocco case. First time chatter here. Oh,
First
wow.
time chatter
Thanks.
here.
Well, thanks for resubbing, Kyle. She's definitely just wrong here. There are other cases of illegal occupation being discussed. And then the settlements, the only other one I know of is people will argue over Morocco, but like, just because your country is the only one doing illegal settlements doesn't make it okay. Like,
of a modern blood libel being deployed against Israel in order to shape the discussion, in order to shape the international politics and diplomacy, in order then to put pressure on Israel. And we've seen the consequences of that, I'm afraid, in so many respects. This is what led to the 7th of October.
Natasha, it's been a wonderful interview. Thank you for coming on. Before we head over to our locals, where our supporters put their questions to you, our final question is always the same. What is the one thing we're not talking about that we really should be?
Before Natasha answers, when the interview phobia, what are your thoughts? What
Not getting enough attention. I'll do my homework between now and then. But that being said, there is something that I think is not getting enough attention. And it's the phenomenon that we're seeing across our universities. Now, we've seen it in the context of these encampments.
is it not to the scale it does, or are they just nitpicking? What, the settlements? Or the settlements? Okay, if I look up Morocco illegal settlements, I just don't like the Israel situation is obviously like unique. So like I don't know. I don't know if there is another example of states building this type of settlements that Israel does, except for maybe Morocco. This is over Israeli settlement expansion, though. Like, if I look up Morocco illegal occupation, annexation or censure, I'm fairly certain. Settler Claude. People argue that this occupation is legal. I don't know the specifics of it, so I don't know if it is for sure or not, but it's been held under international law. Annexation is illegal. I guess this isn't just occupation. This is remain subject to the international guidelines of military occupation. Yeah.
And the vicious anti-Semitism that we've seen, many of them essentially pro-Hamas encampments. But I think we really need to be asking ourselves, how have we enabled, allowed, facilitated a generation of young people to have grown up with what seems a vacuum, a complete lack of appreciation of the freedoms that we enjoy, Western liberal democratic values, and that vacuum which seems to have been taken over by extremists, by the supporters of terrorists, where you have seen these young people find a common purpose in coming together in tents and feeling as though they are fighting for something, feeling that unity without properly processing that they are standing up in defense of internationally prescribed terror organizations. And I think we have to ask ourselves as societies.
Yeah, they have been building it. Do people... Yeah, nobody talks about it. Nobody cares. Do people argue that it is illegal? Now, it's obviously not as big a deal as Israel and Palestine. Many argue that Morocco's occupation in West Bank is illegal. Yeah.
Some extremely hard questions about how we have allowed that to happen. If it is something endemic in our education systems, even before higher education, then that is something that we need to
Point is, she's wrong.
be far better able to talk about and then ultimately grapple with, because that's critical for the future of the United States, Europe, the UK, not least the impact that it has necessarily on discussions in the Middle East.
Natasha, thank you very much.
Okay, don't care. Cop-out answer. Cop-out answer.